Well, good morning, church. I hope this video finds you well, whatever time of day or what day you may be watching this. But today I'll be bringing you the Sunday school lesson for this week, as we've been doing each week, as we've not been able to gather together for our Sunday school classes. And I just want to say I miss you all, as just like last time, and the time before that, and the time before that. This has been quite the year. But this last week, we've had some family members in our church who have been going through a lot and loss of loved ones. And other people have been sick and in the hospitals. And this whole situation has made it very difficult to be conscious of what people think about the situation and how to properly engage them, or let them know that you care about them and what can we do, or, it's just a weird time. And I feel in my heart a care for those who this year's already bad enough in many ways, in certain respects, but to then also go through experiencing death and loss and sickness, which are things that we all eventually have to go through, but during this time definitely seems even worse. And so my heart goes out to you that are listening, no matter who you are. I wish we can hopefully soon be through this, and that we can be back together and we can care for one another like we used to, and to lift up one another and to share burdens with one another, though we still can, though it may be distanced. Just want you to know that your staff loves you and cares for you, and we're doing whatever we can each and every week to minister to you the way God has called us to. Today I have for us a lesson from Luke 16. Some of you maybe have read this story that I wrote a couple weeks ago in our newsletter. Some of you maybe don't get the newsletter or don't read it every week or when we put it out. So I thought I wanted to give this story another go for those who maybe watch these videos who don't read the newsletter, and maybe give some more unpacking of it rather than just what I wrote down. But during this whole summer of reading through the New Testament, I found this story very interesting, and it's the only time this occurs in the Gospels. And the focus of this story is about having your care and concern on the eternal rather than what's temporal. It took me several readings of this gospel story to understand what Jesus is trying to communicate to us. It's very confusing just off of sometimes the way things are worded, or things are said that are very unexpected that you wouldn't typically think to hear from Jesus. But it's a very interesting story that has a very eternal focused mission that I think all of us are due to hear. I feel like with the concerns of today, a lot of concerns people are being told to have is to take care of you and your own, and to watch after yourself. And watching after yourself is a good thing and a thing that you should do. But this distancing measure that we have now put in between everybody has made it very hard to properly care for one another rather than simply care for one's own self. And I think this story that Jesus told kind of gets at that a little bit. Let's read through the story first together, and then we'll go back over it and kind of break it down a little bit and see what we can understand from it. So first off, grab your Bible, open up to Luke chapter 16, starting in verse 1, and this is what the text says. He also said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager.' And the manager said to himself, 'What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. And I've decided what to do, so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, Take your bill and sit down quickly, and write 50. Then he said to another, And how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, Take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that, when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in what is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be destroyed to the one, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. So that's our passage. In my version of the Bible, it says the parable of the dishonest manager. Your version may say the parable of the shrewd manager. But either way, this is quite the interesting tale here. For first, you have a rich man, and that's the first character, and you have his manager, who's the one who's kind of the main person in this story. This rich man, though, he heard something very negative about his own manager. If you had lots of land or lots of property or cattle or whatever it may be, and you were a businessman, maybe you didn't have time to be pertained to all these things, so you would hire somebody who would manage them for you, same as many people do today. Well, the owner, the rich man, has recently found out that his manager has been mismanaging his possessions. And it doesn't really go into great detail if this person was maybe swindling or thieving money from beneath the owner intentionally, or if he was just poor at his job and not doing a good job of managing the owner's assets. So what does this rich man do? But he comes to the manager and he says, What is this that I've been hearing about you? And he tells him, You can no longer be my manager. You're not doing a good enough job. And it's funny because I think that the rich man probably should have just fired him that day and said, Go home, I'll take care of the mess. But rather what it seems like is that he told the man that he's going to be fired and that he needs to either finish up whatever job he's got going on and then go home, or whatever it may be. But he didn't leave immediately, for he was still seen as the manager, at least for some short period of time. So this manager now is trying to figure out what to do now that he knows he's about to lose his job. Verse 3, he says, What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I'm removed from management, people may receive me into their house. So this guy has figured out that this is the only thing he's good at. Well, maybe the master thinks he's not really good at it. But he thinks that this is the only job he can do, which is manage someone else's assets. But he didn't do a good job, so now he's losing his job. He says that he's not strong enough to do any labor type of work, but he's also not the type that he's too proud to sit on the street or a corner and beg for money to provide for himself or his family. So now he's trying to come up with a way in his shrewdness and his clever dealings, whether it's cunning or what have you. He's trying to figure out a way that he can secure himself. His temporal well-being will not change because of this loss of job. He's trying to secure himself either another job or to continue the lifestyle and the roof over his head that he has without being too humbled. So by doing that, it says, verse 5, So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, How much do you owe my master? He said 100 measures of oil. He said to him, well, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. So he just halved the guy's bill. And verse 7 says, then he said to another, and how much do you owe? And he said 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and write 80. So he just took 20% off of his bill. Verse 8 says, the master, this is the part that doesn't quite make sense to some of us, the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world, and here's our reasoning that we get to this, why would he do such a thing? He continues in verse 8, for he says, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. So there's a comment being made here. It seems very strange that if you had someone working for you and you had people that also owed you money, and if that person that was working for you went and halved or 20% off the money that was owed to you, you'd think that you would be upset. You'd think that you would be outraged, maybe, that this guy you already fired has now already done something worse and has lost you even more money because of the way that he lowered the debt for other people that owed you money. But what the master could see in this person was that this person was very clever. He was very shrewd. He was talented in a certain regard that he could look out for his own temporal future. He could secure himself a dwelling or a place and not be left out humbled on the street. And so in a certain regard, in a certain manner, the master could look at that and could commend that or praise that for what it was. One commentator I read said that this, in a sense, was the master giving props to his manager for what he did. Now, there have been different people that have tried different takes on this and saying, well, the master was happy because the manager dealt with the debtors and made a better relationship with them for the master, and that they would actually get more money back instead of defaulting. And there's a weird rabbit trail that you could go down in trying to make sense of this, but I think it misses the key point, because the key point that Jesus is going to give us in this, and how do we interpret this story, has to do with temporalness versus what is eternal. And we don't need to lose sight of that. This manager was very temporal focused versus what Jesus wants to get his disciples focused on, which is that which is eternal. And that is the key to which unlocking the interpretation of this story. So, in verse 8 it says, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And that is a very general statement that is being made here about how this world operates, how this world works. At the beginning of this, I mentioned that we're often being told to look out for yourself, to look out for one's own family, which are all good things that aren't necessarily bad in themselves and things that at certain extents we should do. But in and of themselves, they are very selfish and self-centered and very temporal-minded, which is not what Jesus is trying to get his disciples and also us to do, which is to get ourselves fixated away from ourselves, fixated away from just those things that we like and love, and fixated towards things that are eternal. So he makes a general comment here that many of us know. If you were to go into the business world, you will see it's a dog-eat-dog world, as many people have said, and that the people who are temporal-minded, funny enough, happen to be very successful in temporal dealings. And people who are eternal-minded often don't put the focus on those things that are temporal, and therefore lack the shrewdness or the cleverness or the cunningness that may be needed in a business type of world. So, verse 9, then we get this understanding here. It's Jesus is talking. He says, and I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. So there was praise being given to this dishonest or shrewd manager because he was able to secure for himself, after losing a job, a future job or a future dwelling. Why? Because he knew other people that had debts to this master, and he was doing favors for them, expecting that they, especially people who live in a very honor and shame culture, would return the favor for him when he needed it. So it was a very clever move that this manager did. And so what Jesus is saying is that likewise, he's not praising this guy's dishonesty. He's not praising the fact that he may have cost his manager a whole lot of money, and that's how we should do things. He's not praising those aspects. He's praising the fact that if this man who's temporal focused can secure for himself by his means a temporal future, how come we who are as believers to be eternal focused, why don't we do more to secure for us and others an eternal future? Jesus often makes this type of engagement with his disciples and with us readers by taking something that's a story that is something less than, and he kicks it up a notch to something that is even greater. You know, he'll take the story about yes, a man who commits adultery with another woman is committing sin, but you in your heart, if you've just looked upon someone lustfully, you've already committed adultery. He takes something that is less and makes it much bigger. And in the same fashion, he's doing that here. And he's saying that we as believers here in verse 9, we should be using all the resources. And he says unrighteous wealth. That's the things of this world. And your translation may actually say by unrighteous mammon. Jesus is saying we should be stewarding as the best way we can, not to secure our temporal future, but we know all these things will fail. So when all of our resources, when all of our money's gone, when our house falls down, when we lose our job, when all these things fail, which he says we know they will, that we will have already secured for ourselves an eternal dwelling, meaning we have within our heart focused on what should be primary and what should be first and central, which is the kingdom of God and not our own kingdom. Not focused on the kingdom of Warren, but on the kingdom of Jesus. That is what is most important. And we see this in several other passages. One I want to bring this out to you is in previous chapters in Luke, chapter 12. He says this starting in verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbiter over you?" And he said to him, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" So Jesus already gave this warning previously in a couple chapters back about you can work as hard as you want and store up as much as you want here on earth and decide to relax and take it easy because you have all these possessions, you have all this wealth. But once you're gone, whose will they be? They won't be yours, for these things are but temporal. And you shall lay your treasure up in heaven with God, for that will show where your heart truly lies. Does your heart lie here on earth with all these temporal possessions? Or do they lie in heaven with God? And I think that during this time that we're living in, it's a reality check for some of us. We've worked our lives to secure a nice house, to secure certain possessions and wealth. But what does that all mean if you're confined to that space? If you can't go and travel and do what you want to do, what good is maybe that money besides essentially keeping us alive with food? And these are things that we often think about, and maybe we have a recollection of, man, is this something that I should be pursuing my life for? Working this job simply just to have this big house or this vehicle or this pool or this vacation or this type of retirement? Or am I doing these things and earning all this unrighteous wealth, as it's said, to further God's kingdom, to secure for myself a kingdom to which hopefully my friends can join, because I have stewarded the resources God has entrusted me with in such a way that people have seen that I don't hold them as my treasure, but rather I hold God as my treasure. And because He's my treasure, I know that all these things that He has given me are simply but of mercy and grace. So, like He has given to me what God has given, I likewise give to others, so that others can see the love of God and turn to Him and treasure Him and not things. So I think that's important. And now some of us may think, well, if God would just give me a break and would just, give me a bunch of money or give me a bunch of resources, I would definitely give more to God, or I'll definitely start treasuring God more. But as we'll see here in this last couple verses, that's not true. And I'm not saying it's not true because I know you personally, but I'm saying it's not true because Jesus said it's not true. Jesus says this: one who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches? So it's easy to think that if we only had more, that we would be a better person, or we could do more with it. But Jesus is saying it doesn't work that way. The things don't change your heart. Your heart changes how you view and perceive those things. And so He's saying if you're not being faithful with even the things here on earth, well, why would He entrust you with the things that are of the kingdom of eternal? And so maybe this is an eye-opening moment for us during this time. Are we simply being selfish and looking out for our own? Or is God looking at us and saying, yes, you're a faithful steward of a very little, so I will entrust you with very much? He continues on and says, verse 12, and if you have not been faithful in what is another's, who will give that to which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Paul mentions in 1 Timothy chapter 6 something similar. He says in 1 Timothy 6, starting in verse 6, but godliness with contempt is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. So like I said, I wanted to read this story today. One, because it's peculiar, and it's honestly been stuck in the back of my mind for the last month. And I know I wrote it down once, but I wanted to share with any other listeners out there who may learn something from this. To remember that we are to be kingdom focused. To remember that we are to, as faithful Christians, to be stewards as best we can with all that we have. Because we know that everything that we have is given of God. But it's current environment makes it very strange, doesn't it? It makes it very hard to wonder if what we're doing, am I doing it selfishly? Be- because I'm concerned for my own health, or I'm concerned for my own well being over others? Or is it the right thing to do? And that may change depending on your circumstance and your environment. I'm not here to come down on those who've been at home longer than others, or those who have shied away from doing things in community. I completely understand it's a difficult choice to make day in and day out, especially for those who have health issues. But that's where we as the church should be understanding, and we should try to, as best we can, keep in contact with those and see, is there anything that we can do for those people who are stuck at home or can't do other things that maybe a young 20-something-year-old can do. But I nonetheless wanted to put this in our heads this week, that we should always be looking at everything and seeing, are we stewarding what God has given us to the best of our ability in the way that God has called us to? Because these things on this earth don't matter. Eventually, they'll fade away, or eventually, we will fade away. And those things will no longer matter to us. But rather, God's kingdom always matters. There's a few things I want to share with you. One of them is a quote by a man named A.W. Pink. And he's a theologian from a long time ago. And he's mentioning these two things, God and money. And really, money can be any type of a resource or thing that you covet or you think is the one thing that you want over God. We often put these things against one another. But the challenge is to use those things the way God wants us to use them. But he says this about the love of money versus the love of God. He says, these orders are diametrically opposed. The one commands you to walk by faith, loving God, the other to walk by sight. The one to be humble, the other to be proud. The one to set your affections on things above, the other to set them on things that are on the earth. The one to look at the things unseen and eternal, the other to look at things that are seen and temporal. The one to have your conversation in heaven, the other to cleave to the dust. The one to be careful for nothing, and the other to be full of anxiety. The one to be content with such things as you have, and the other to enlarge your desires. The one to be ready to distribute, the other to withhold. The one to look at things of others, the other to look at one's own things. The one to seek happiness in the Creator, the other to seek happiness in the creature. Is it not plain? There is no serving two such masters. And so Jesus was our substitute for us. He's the only one and the only reason that we can live this life. This is an impossible life to live without his intercession in our own hearts. And he gives us the model by which we are to live. He came and he laid down his life, and we are to do the same. And this whole message and these quotes and these different parables and stories remind me of a hymn. And I leave you with these words today from Be Thou My Vision. The verse goes, riches I heed not, nor man's empty praise. Thou my inheritance, now and always. Thou and thou only, first in my heart. High King of heaven, my treasure thou art. No matter what troubles you go through this week, I hope you realize that God is your treasure. He is the one true eternal treasure, and he's worth trusting in and worth living for. And I pray that this week he would be your treasure. I miss you all. I love you all. I can't wait to see your face again. I hope you have a great week. Have a good one.